Hi everyone, my name is Christine Ha. I'm best known for being the blind cook that won MasterChef Season 3 in 2012. I am Vietnamese American, born in Southern California, raised in Texas, and now I own 2 restaurants in Houston, The Blind Goat and Xinjiao.
Welcome to The Vietnamese. I'm your host, Kenneth Nguyen. Being part of a culture of nearly 100 million Vietnamese people in the world today comes with a lot of pain, proud history, and privilege. Join me as I highlight and explore the Vietnamese experience from all over the world. Thank you, Christine. What does it mean to be Vietnamese to you these days?
What does it mean to be Vietnamese? It means to have a heritage from Southeast Asia, particularly the country of Vietnam. It means eating Vietnamese food, things like fish sauce. It means knowing a little bit of how to speak the language. I used to speak it a lot more when I was younger, when I had more people to speak it to or with, but I've lost some of that. It means to value the history of Vietnam and how I got here, to how the long roundabout journey of how I got to the US or was born here.
How did your parents arrive?
My parents emigrated from Vietnam, like many others, actually in 1975 as refugees. They escaped Saigon right before the fall of it, about a day or two before April 30th, 1975. The story is that my parents were courting and they were not married yet. My father ran to my mom's house and asked for her hand in marriage and to take her to America. So she packed a bag, left very quickly with my father. They went to the port and was eventually able to get onto a US naval ship and left there. Then floated at sea for a little bit of time because I believe one of the engines broke on the ship. And then eventually they were rescued and brought to the Philippines, where they were flown to Guam and stayed in a refugee camp for a while before they were sponsored by a church in Pennsylvania.
Did they first fly into or get sponsored out of Fort Indiantown Gap?
I'm not exactly sure about that exact history. I only know what I know because I asked some of my family for the memoir that I've been working on, but that I'm not really sure.
Yeah, if it's Pennsylvania, I'm assuming because my family, Viet Thanh Nguyen's family, uh, there's 4 camps across the country. So if they're in Pennsylvania, then the chances were it's Fort Indiantown Gap.
Huh.
Yeah, a lot of people
I'll
went to
ask my dad next time I talk to him.
yeah,
See if he remembers.
people went to work for the Hershey factory. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, I know that my father, he was an architect in Vietnam, and then he told me that the church that sponsored him and my mom, they gave him a job as like a drafter, I think, for so he kind of went into the engineering route, but originally he was an architect in Vietnam, but I think he was able to get some sort of job in like maybe the electrical engineering field.
So then you were born in California, right? Southern
Right.
California? In Orange County, LA, or?
I was born in Long Beach.
Oh, wow. And then how many years did your family spend in Long Beach?
I believe we were only there for about 2 years. So I think my family moved to Houston when I was around 2 years old, and it was for my dad's work. I think at that time in the 80s, like the economy in Houston was booming. So he somehow found a job in Houston, and we moved to Houston pretty early on. So maybe around 1981 or 82.
And what was it like for you growing up in Houston?
Uh, to be honest, it was kind of, I mean, I felt like it was a pretty uneventful upbringing, aside from the fact that, when I was a teenager, my mom was diagnosed with cancer and eventually passed away. So that was like a huge hurdle in a big mark on my childhood. And, but I would say growing up in Houston, there was definitely a Vietnamese population. So we were able to get Vietnamese food, but there weren't many restaurants. We would have to drive pretty far. At the time, we were driving from we lived on the west side of town, and we would drive maybe 30 minutes or so to get into Midtown in Houston, where there was the first Little Saigon, I would say, the original Little Saigon in Houston. So that's where we would go for to do like the grocery shopping, to buy the Vietnamese ingredients, or to get banh mi, or to get to go eat pho. So we had to drive quite a bit to just get the food, and I think get the comforts of home for my parents.
How much cooking did your mom do?
She did a lot. I think, growing up, we didn't have a lot of money. My parents came here with barely anything in their pockets, so they had to start over completely. And so having me, I was pretty much grew up an only child, and I think they had to go to work. So back in Vietnam, like I mentioned, my dad was an architect. My mom was actually, I believe, like a triple major. I think she was studying philosophy, literature, and law. And then coming to the US, she was initially an English teacher, and then she became a social worker in Houston. And so she worked a lot of hours and would bring a lot of work home, and at the same time had to feed the family. So in the traditional role, like my mom was doing all of the cooking. So she cooked quite a bit, because we could afford to go out to eat once in a while, but mostly we ate at home. So my mom probably cooked multiple times a week, and she would always cook big batch dishes that we could freeze, like picaw, so that we can just kind of chip away at it throughout the week.
Right. When many of us, whoever we are, whether we're Vietnamese or El Salvadorian, we always think back to our moms being the best cook.
Yeah.
But now here's a question, because I kind of know that, your mom had a lot of influence on your, on your palate, perhaps with the Vietnamese food. But knowing what you know now about Vietnamese food and just the food world, how good was your mom's cooking? I mean, if you were to be honest.
If I were to be honest, her cooking was good. I think
Mm.
she's still, from my memory, my memory is foggy, but your memories mean a lot. That's all we have in life at the end of the day. So from my memory, she honestly made the best pho bo that my father and I have both had. Um, I know that my dad told me years after she passed away, like he told me their friends used to try to convince her to open her own pho shop.
Wow.
Um, so I believe, she definitely had some strong dishes. So her tikka was good, her yuchua, her pho, obviously, her bún bò Huế, and then she cooks simpler dishes too that I find don't necessarily take a lot of skill to make, but like soy lap sườn, maybe like sun nuong, those
Right.
kinds of things. Like, yeah, we just grew up with a variety of those sorts of foods, and my fondest memories of my mom in my childhood definitely revolve around the food that I ate that she served at our table.
There's a sort of I don't know if the word injustice is right, but when we compare our mom's food versus like restaurant food, it can never be on the same level because of the amount of ingredients or the amount of time that's actually spent actually making like pho ba, right?
Mhm.
It's real bones and whatever. But if you think about, like, if it was a home cooked meal in a restaurant, like, just I think the ratio of the money or the profit to margin, all of that stuff doesn't really pan out, and nobody's really willing to pay for sort of the quality of a home cooked meal in the restaurant. Do you find that to be true, or do I have that way off?
No, I find that true. I think that's a struggle that I've been feeling since I opened my first restaurant, The Blind Goat, is
Mm.
Vietnamese food is perceived by most of the public as cheap street food or cheap home cooked or comfort
Right.
food. It's not perceived on the same level as, for example, Japanese food or even Korean food. And so I find that I'm trying to do, I consider my restaurants like a second generation Vietnamese American uh, restaurant or cuisine that we're trying to do. So we're trying to elevate the cuisine and show that we can use higher end ingredients, higher quality ingredients, using locally sourced ingredients, doing more advanced techniques to achieve the food quality, and then paying our staff, fair wages as well. And all these things contribute to the price of the dish on the menu being higher than, for example, some of your more authentic or traditional mom and pop Vietnamese shops that you would find in Asia Town. And there's a mixed camp. There's people that definitely understand what I'm trying to do, and what I'm my intentions are with the cuisine. And then there are some people who and these are Vietnamese people too, who sometimes come and say, oh, I could get a very similar dish for about half the cost in Asia Town. And they don't understand that where we're located makes a difference. Like, our rent prices are different.
Right.
The fact that I'm not, paying cash under the table to all of my staff. The fact that I'm paying my taxes and I
Right.
take credit card, and all of these things add up, and now, especially with the supply chain issues since the pandemic, and prices of a lot of ingredients are just skyrocketing. And we have to build that cost into what we charge for the dishes in order for us to stay open and be profitable. And I don't even mean being profitable meaning like I'm putting money in my pocket. I don't pay myself at the restaurants, and I've barely taken any distributions, especially since the pandemic. So
Right.
for me, it's just making sure that my staff gets paid on time so that they can take care of themselves and their family, and then that we can keep the operations of our business going. So I think that's actually a big struggle of mine, that I've been dealing with since opening the very first restaurant, is dealing with people not really understanding, I guess, my vision for my restaurants.
Yeah, this perception. But I mean, there's so many things to dissect with the two things that you just talked about. It's like the perception of sort of like Asian town, and the price points. But something that people are not really aware of, and I really want to talk about this because I've been in the food business for 10 years, and I feed my family with that, doing event space food. And a case of oil 2 years ago was
Yeah.
$18. Today in LA, it's 42. The
Yes.
price of pork has almost doubled. The price of beef has skyrocketed. Everything
Mhm.
that we have bought on a wholesale level has doubled. Now, the problem is we can't double our prices on the street or the retail level because people would just freak out.
Mhm.
But that's coming, because if that stuff is doubling on the wholesale
Mhm.
level, we can only increase our prices maybe 20%, 30%. And
Mhm.
so this tsunami is coming, but I don't think that, the public is aware of it or is ready for these hyperinflated prices. So
Mhm.
I don't know what I'm going to be doing, or my the groups that work with me in the event space. I have 10 years, and my wife's in the business. It is a very scary, and I don't mean to scare you, but I just want to put it out there so people understand that the price of food, the margins are very thin.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, it's true. They say that it's rare that a restaurant, even when it's running well and profitable and busy, that you're really having a large profit margin. Restaurant industry, what I've learned is oftentimes your people are going into it as a labor of love, because you're not really doing it to get rich.
right.
Um, and you're right. I'm glad you're bringing this up, because I think the more people talk about it, I think you have to prepare people to realize that eventually we're all, as a collective whole, going to have to absorb this sort of, sorry, let me pause. Someone's at my door. Just rephrase. Oh, I was talking about the um how it's important that we're talking about this, and I'm glad you brought it up, because eventually I think we need to, the more that we have this conversation, I think the more we're preparing as a collective whole to be prepared to absorb this cost. And I think people are starting to, I think if they're aware of the prices they're paying at the grocery store, I think they're starting to realize that yes, prices of of goods are increasing at the grocery store. So hopefully they're intelligent enough to make the connection that if it's rising in the grocery store, it's obviously going to be rising in the restaurants because our cost is also going up.
Right. And the second point to that sort of question that we were talking about earlier is the perception. You take French and Italian food, and French and Italian food's marked up fairly healthy. You know, like the markup is
Mhm.
is a lot bigger than, and I think that there's more range in Vietnamese foods in terms of like we can use better product. There's a lot more progress that we can make in Vietnamese food, but we can't charge the higher prices like French and Italian food.
Mhm. I think it'll take some generations for people pioneering that sort of way of thinking. I think then it could happen in the future. But I mean, you're totally right. Like Vietnamese, I don't think people realize how laborious Vietnamese food is, like how long it takes to make a pot of pho. Like we're cooking that broth for several hours overnight, and it's similar to making a bowl of ramen, but yet people are willing to pay $20 for a bowl of
Exactly.
ramen. They scoff at a $20 bowl of pho, even if you're using better meats. Sometimes, people are not willing to pay that. So it's definitely, I think, a tough image to change and a tough mindset to change. But I think it really takes the next generation of chefs and restaurateurs like myself to try to keep forging towards that sort of way of thinking, and hopefully eventually, in the generation after me or the one after that, like Vietnamese food will be able to be in the same caliber as French food, Italian food, and Japanese food.
Wow, let's I'm gonna even go deeper with this whole ramen versus pho. If you think about it, ramen is made from pork, right?
Hmm.
Pork is half the cost of beef. I don't know what it's like there in
Hmm.
Houston, but it's half the cost of beef
Yeah.
here in
Hmm.
LA. So, but the bowl of ramen is twice as much as a bowl of pho.
Hmm.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely something to think about, and I'm really glad you're bringing this up. I think it's something important to discuss and to for people to think about. And it's not necessarily that everyone will agree, but I think the fact that we're bringing this up and talking about it, I think hopefully it gets people's uh, brains like thinking and their wheels going. And so next time they go to a restaurant that's in a like a more expensive part of town, and the decor is nice, and the service is good, and the plateware is nice, that they understand, okay, all of these factors go into building why that bowl of pho costs the way it does.
Right. And food is really the merging of commerce and art. I mean, really down to the core of it really is food. Art is meeting right in the middle with commerce and business. Now,
Mhm.
if you're a really good cook and you're a really good artist and you can really present and you can make these flavors pop, you can, have a you can cook, but that doesn't mean you can operate a restaurant, and vice versa. If you're really good with the numbers, you have a business background, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And a lot of the times when we think about restaurants, it's really the business side that really tries to make sense of the art side, right? And but you have a
Mhm.
business, you have a background in business, and you started out in life with the business background, right?
Mhm.
What what did you like? What did you think that you were going to be headed into as you were going through college?
Well, my major was in finance. My minor was in management information systems, so the technology side. Coming out of it, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go into the financial side of the corporate world. I ended up actually going into more the tech side. So when I graduated with my bachelor's in business, I my first job was actually in oil and gas, obviously because I was in Houston. But I was a software consultant building accounting software for oil and gas companies. And that was, I didn't really know if that's where I would be long term per se, but I think that it made good money. It was something that I did enjoy to a degree doing. Like I have some part of my brain is analytical. So I did enjoy the aspect of coding. Uh, I feel like I really wasn't sure where I was going with this. And my career changed very early in life because only a year and a half into my first job, I had a very serious health issue where over a period of 4 days, I went completely paralyzed from my neck down. And it turned out it was a inflammation of my spinal cord that caused that. And I was eventually diagnosed with neuromyelitis optica, or NMO, which is similar to multiple sclerosis. So it's my immune system attacking my neurological system. So it was attacking my spinal cord at the time, and then eventually it attacked my optic nerve so much that they atrophied. So that's how I lost my vision in my 20s. So I had to pivot with my career fairly early in life. And at that point, I was just many years of just trying to recover from the NMO attacks and dealing with the vision loss and learning how to live and adapt my life with this vision loss. And so at that point, I really didn't know what I was going to do, but I decided to just kind of follow what I enjoyed doing. And that was the world of literature. And I ended up going back to school to get my master's in creative writing. So, but I look back and I feel like the business background was very important. No matter what I was going to do later in life, I feel like having the understanding of how the business world works and how commerce works is very important, regardless of where I was going, because it teaches you how to deal with people, with clients, with colleagues. It teaches you communication skills. It teaches you, I think, just the importance of certain responsibilities and how to negotiate in business, how accounting works, how looking at financial statements work, and how that at the end of the day, like when you have a business, it comes down to your profit and losses. So all of these things, I think, really helped me where I am today, which is kind of, like you said, mixing or like having the cross of the culinary arts with the commercial side of owning a restaurant. And having that business background definitely helped. I think being creative and understanding cooking obviously also helps.
Right. It's the backbone of everything, because if you think about like the ingredients you use or what kind of time it takes to put a dish together, it's all about the metrics and the numbers that support the vision that you're trying to do.
Right. Yeah.
How much
Sorry
cooking?
about my dog. Do you need me to lock him up? He's barking at our person mowing the lawn.
Let me pause it.
Okay.
So up to this point, how much cooking were you doing?
Well, I'm completely self-taught, and I didn't start learning how to cook until I was about 20 years old. I was in my second year in college. I never grew up learning how to cook from my mom, even though she was a great cook. I took it for granted, not thinking that I would lose my mom at such a early age in life. So I never learned from her, nor did I have the interest to. I just thought, eventually I'll learn when I'm older. Of course, I lost the opportunity when she passed away. She didn't, like most moms and grandmas, write any recipes down. So I have no idea how to recreate any of her dishes. But it was when I went to college and that I realized I missed the foods that I grew up eating. And I wanted to be able to enjoy my mom's food again. And so I just bought cookbooks and experimented in the kitchen, tried to cook Vietnamese dishes. And so it was all really by trial and error. And that's really how I taught myself how to cook. And it became a very enjoyable hobby for me. It was something I just loved to do, because after I cooked a few successful dishes that my roommates and my friends would enjoy, it made me very happy to be able to do something or make something for some other people to enjoy. And I think that's why I kept at cooking, because I just like pleasing people. And I think part of that is, part of it is my personality. Part of it is probably growing up as a Vietnamese child, like always as a female as well. I think it was kind of just in the old school way, like we're taught to always say yes and be obedient and please. And, we're supposed to take pleasure out of pleasing others. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. I think as long as you stay true to yourself and you know your limitations and what you're willing to do, then yes, by all means, of course, like that's what makes human connections work, is when we try to make other people happy. So for me, that's really why I love food, and I just kept at it as a hobby, and it really wasn't something that became a career until years later when I auditioned for MasterChef and then won that season.
W- Were there any books or channels at the time that you remember that you were studying from? Any cookbooks or?
I mean, the very first Vietnamese cookbook I bought, I believe, was called the Classic Cuisine of Vietnam or something like that. And it was just like a paperback. It didn't have any pictures in it. It was one that I think Amazon at that time was just kind of becoming a thing. So I was able to buy the book from Amazon and get it delivered to my apartment at college. And it was probably one that was not expensive. I didn't have a lot of money in college, and it just had a lot of classic recipes in there that I kind of wanted to learn. So that was one of the first books that I remember buying and learning how to make some like very traditional dishes from, like gà kho gung. And I think thịt kho might have been in there as well, but that took a while to learn that. And I didn't really learn how to properly make thịt kho until my aunt taught me years later. So yeah, I recall that book. As far as channels or anything on the internet, then I don't think there was that much. But I think from time to time I would search for recipes and find a few Vietnamese recipes online. But I think things are still seem fairly young on the internet back then.
Yeah, and I feel like Vietnamese cuisine back then was fairly young in America.
Yes, I agree. I think yeah, I would say most people I knew back then did not know pho or bánh mì or cơm tấm, but I think now most everyone has heard of that or has eaten those dishes.
Okay, so I'm gonna ask a funny question to me, but when you hear musicians or when you see art painters and stuff like that, and sometimes you read the history, and a lot of these people were sort of gifted, sort of talent. Do you think that talent has a lot to do with a chef's sort of quality or their output? Or do you think just over time, following recipes, going through the rote actions, that they're going to arrive at a place with spirit and soul in the food?
I think it's a little bit of both. And I don't know if that's a cop out answer, Ken, but I think with anything, like not just cooking, but I think any sort of mastering any sort of practice, uh, I think first, I think it does take hard work. So I think first you get there by like like you mentioned, reading recipes, a lot of making a lot of mistakes in the kitchen, doing it over and over and over. Um, and then eventually you start understanding the science behind things, or understanding, okay, this is what happens when you add this ingredient at this point of cooking. And then you start learning those skills, and then perhaps more creative things can launch from there, and more quote unquote ingenious things. I think talent comes in, if you're born with that talent, that really allows you to take off with whatever skill or practice or art you're trying to do. Um, so if you really want to excel, I think in something you need um, both. But I think it's more hard work and perseverance than perhaps like natural or natural born talent, I would say.
Right. Because now that I'm thinking about your journey from when you started to cook in your second year of college to the point where you are now a contestant, right? Like that,
Mhm.
those were years that you probably had to spend in the kitchen. And
Mhm.
so at what point do you feel confident enough to say, I'm going to sign up for this contest and go for it?
Well, I'll tell you the truth. I did not feel confident at all. I only did it honestly because my friends and my family told me I should try. And I was like, okay, well, I'm in school for creative writing. So I'll just try this out and then hopefully come up with some story and, and like have some ideas
Oh,
for a story. So
wow.
I didn't really go. And this is how I think I view all like everything in life. Like I still just consider myself a home cook. I don't have formal culinary training. I'm I'm just good at cooking at home for people. And I love that sort of hospitality and opening my doors and entertaining people at home. And that translates into the restaurant, yes. But when I went on the show, it was just really, I knew I could cook pretty well. Not necessarily better than the next person, but I thought I had a certain sensibility. I feel like my friends and family told me my story was interesting. They thought that America should know that in spite of vision loss, one person can learn to cook. So they encouraged me to go, but I really just went to just experience it and see what it was like to be, I had the opportunity. I figured why not seize it and see where it takes me. So I wouldn't say I necessarily auditioned for the show thinking I was the best or an amazing cook. I just kind of did it just because with the hopes of, hey, this is something new and different. Let's try it out.
That's insane. That is insane to hear the story. I thought that you were just, oh, you wanted to launch into a new career, and this was
No,
yeah, but
it
it
was
makes
all,
sense.
it seems all by chance, really. I've just been very fortunate. And I think too, when you asked that question about, kind of, is it, how much of it is talent? How much of it is it kind of just like grit and hard work? I think also success comes from the intersection of those two things along with opportunity. So some of it is luck. You have to be in the right place at the right time, but also from your own perspective, you have to seize opportunities that are laid out before you. And sometimes you don't know if it's an opportunity, but you have to kind of be open to things. And recently I had a chance to chat with Matthew McConaughey, and he was talking about his recent memoir, uh, Green Lights. And I think one of the questions we asked him was, how much of your success do you chalk up to luck, and how much of it is hard work? And he did say, like, he felt like he was able to hit all these green lights in his life because he opened himself up to the universe and allowed opportunity and like allowed began to see opportunity everywhere. And I think that's also important, is having that kind of mindset where you are yes, you can be good at something, you can love something that you're doing, you also have to work hard at it, but you also have to realize that there's always opportunities coming at you, and it's really seizing those opportunities or taking advantage of those opportunities, whether it's meeting someone new, attending something that you don't normally attend, accepting something that comes along and a request, or any of these things. They're all opportunities.
Yeah, I'm gonna just call it the soft science of success, right? And this
Mm.
is very rarely discussed in the Vietnamese world because we're very hard science, and I don't mean that as a pun or anything, but we really believe that, just hard work and just staying in our lane and doing jobs that are, very safe is going to be enough for our life. But I think today with our second generation, we are beyond just surviving or in survival mode, and we want
Mhm.
to express. And floating into the world of art and culinary or music or film requires us to really adapt what Matthew McConaughey shared with you, is sort of, just being very open. And that takes a lot of guts to do that, right,
Mhm.
Christine? It's like you have to be very courageous now to step outside of just surviving.
Yeah, I agree. And that's not to knock either, like what you're talking about, that hard science. Like I completely understand, like perhaps our parents' generation, like they were in survival mode. They were living in a, war-ravaged country. They're trying to possibly escape the country. They left the country with nothing. They came here, tried to raise a family, not necessarily knowing the language or understanding the culture. So as human beings, I completely understand why we would resort to that survival mode and thinking, okay, I'm going to do something safe because I need to provide for myself and my family. I think our generation, we're fortunate that we're like the next generation where we're not having to worry about that happening to us where we're living. Now we can concern ourselves with other things, thinking about the global economy or climate change. We have that privilege now to be thinking about these things in the future. I think back then our parents were thinking day to day, like week by week. And now we're able to think longer term in the future. And then we're able to exercise things like the arts, and things that maybe seem riskier to our parents. And I think that's something that to me is the fortune and the blessing that my parents' perseverance and what they lived through was able to afford me.
Right. And that's a gift from our parents' generation that I don't overlook. It's that
Mhm.
grit, that determination, that sacrifice that we as second generation, we really get to absorb that sort of that pattern, that way of
Mhm.
living, and it's really helped us out. Um, I want to ask you at what point um, during the show, the did you go, wait, shit just got real, right? Because you're going into the show as a exercise to have some stuff to write about. But at what point did you go, okay, wait, this is real?
Well, there were many of those moments, I think. One was when I got the white apron at the beginning. So I passed the auditions that you see on television. So I was like, oh, I'm actually in the top like 36 or something that it was. And then it got narrowed down to like top 18, I think. And I was like, oh, I'm in the top 18. I might have a chance, but yeah, right. And then I think I was like, okay, my goal is to get into top 10 because I feel like that sounds pretty good. Like, as part of my title later, I'm gonna be like, oh, Christine Ha, like MasterChef season 3, top 10. I was like, that sounds pretty good. So then I hit that goal of being top 10. I was like, oh, maybe I can make it to top 5, but I don't need to. Like, I'm good with top
Wow.
10. Then when I made it to top 5, I was like, okay, this is getting closer. And then when I got into the finals, I was like, oh, this shit is getting real. And I could
Wow.
possibly win. I have a 50-50 chance of winning. But to me, I still wasn't thinking like, oh, I have this in the bag. Like for sure. I was just like, I don't know. Like I always live by the mantra, like hope for the best and expect the worst. So every day I went into that MasterChef kitchen and I was like, okay, I'm going to hope I do really well, but I'm going to expect to go home today. So it was quite stressful, this binary way of thinking. But I think that's really kind of helped me all through life. Like that sort of mentality's helped me kind of weather all the tough times. And I think I learned that from just being young and losing my mom to cancer when I was a teenager. And I realized like, oh, life isn't quote unquote fair, whatever that means, but life can be hard. And I hoped that my mom would have beat the cancer, but now I realize that she didn't. And so I have to realize that moving forward, you kind of have to prepare for the worst so that you don't feel like you're getting hit by, out of left field. So that's kind of what happened, how I dealt with the diagnosis of NMO, how I dealt with the vision loss. I hope that I would regain my vision back, but okay, I'm not going to expect it. So what do I need to do to prepare for the worst? Or what's my plan B, my plan C? What are my contingency plans? And so that's really how I dealt with MasterChef, was the same way. I was just like, I hope I
Right.
win this certain challenge, but you know what? I could very well go home today. And as long as I did my best that day and I go home, then it was meant to be. It's fine.
I always have this gnawing suspicion, and every time I talk to somebody like you, it becomes more clear that, like, when you have a parent, because I'm a parent, and I think to myself, like, if I died, it'd be a terrible situation for the kids. But I kind of have this feeling that I keep seeing this pattern over and over, is when a parent dies, it's sort of like kind of beneficial in weird ways for the child, because the rug is pulled out from under you. The net, the
Mhm.
guarantees, the safety net, all of it is gone. And now it cranks, this makes the child think of life in a very different way. Instead of
Mhm.
having both parents being spoiled, the parents sort of try to teach you things, but there's no bigger lesson than taking a parent away from you. And it's showing up in these patterns, and that is like the one thing that makes me feel like, okay, if I died, then okay, then they're gonna get their,
They'll be okay.
yeah, they'll be okay. They'll
Yeah.
it happened to my
Yeah.
dad. Yeah.
I think it's I feel like in some strange way, and this is only something I can tell you in hindsight, like having had like so many years pass between, now and losing my mom. But I feel like growing up as an only child, my mom was very overprotective. So she definitely coddled me. Like, that's also why I never learned how to cook, because she didn't let me in the kitchen near the knives or near the stove. And I think having that rug yanked out from underneath me when she passed away, it was completely turned my life upside down. And it took me many years to fully go through the grieving process correctly, because I was so young. Already I was having like teenage angst. So that was already hard. And then now dealing with something like the loss of a parent was a very strange and tumultuous time. But I think looking back now, I feel like that forced me to not be coddled, to grow up quickly. And this could also be turned, it could have very easily spun into something negative or a downward spiral, right? But I feel like I was able to survive that. And I look back on it and I'm like, man, that was one of the
Mm.
toughest experiences of my life, but it made me a stronger person. It made me a more compassionate person. So in the end, I realized that the loss of my mom at a young age was definitely hard. And it's not necessarily something I would, still want to happen to me now. Like, of course, if I could have my mom back, I would. But I think that hand that I was dealt with, I was able to turn it around into something more positive. And that's, I think, just learning to be stronger and stand up for myself and be more independent. And knowing too that life is not easy. And I think being coddled as a child, of course, as a parent, you want to protect your child. That's second nature. But at the same time, like, I feel like it's important to let your children flourish and grow and learn things on their own, because otherwise they won't be prepared for how harsh life can be. And life can be hard, and we have to learn how to deal with it and adapt and move forward with the help of whatever resources we can get, whether it's our friends and family or therapy or whatever it is around us. I think it's important for children to learn that life isn't fair and life can be hard, and then equip them with the tools on how to deal with those hardships.
Yes. And was your father sort of did he withdraw, or did he, as a I'm just imagining as a Vietnamese father, how engaged does a Vietnamese father at that time become? Does he pull back, or does he jump in and go, you know what, Christine, I'm here for you and I'm going to communicate? And that just doesn't sound likely with a Vietnamese
Yeah,
father.
no, my father is seeing he for me, he's a very old school traditional Vietnamese man. So he is very reticent, reserved. Um, he I most of my childhood, our relationship was about like playing together, like playing games, or he would, tell me jokes, and it was kind of lighthearted like that. But he wasn't someone that I would go to with a serious conversation like I would perhaps my mom. So I think when my mom was out of the picture, it was hard for my dad and me to connect, especially because I was kind of going through adolescence as a teenage girl. Like, it was not easy for me to get along with my dad. So we weren't really seeing eye to eye. We didn't communicate well. And, he was dealing with his own loss of his wife. So, and it was hard for us to really connect and communicate, because I think both of us were kind of just reeling from the aftermath of losing someone in our family that was so close to us. And it was only three of us. So now we were a family of two. And so, yeah, no, I mean, it took many years for my dad and me to kind of have a more a relationship that mirrored more of a parent and child. So now I feel like my dad is kind of like my friend. So we're
Mm.
able to talk about a lot of things and joke about things, and nothing like too serious. But I understand now the workings of our relationship and how it works for the both of us. So.
Right, right. Now, going back to the whole thing, I wanted to ask you in terms of like you go and you get this MFA for creative writing, but did you want to be a novelist? Did you want to be a screenwriter? What did you want to do in the creative writing field?
I didn't know. So I started off. What really inspired me initially was because when I was going through all of my health issues, I wrote an essay that I submitted to a very small periodical about um, the loss of my mom and kind of how that parallels with losing my vision and the loss of independence in a way because of my vision loss. And it got published in this very tiny periodical. And I remember thinking, oh, it's so cool to have my byline. So in a magazine. So I was like, okay, let me explore this idea more. Like, can writing be something that's a career? So I initially went into the creative writing program actually as a fiction concentration. It's because growing up, I always loved reading novels and stories, and I felt like it helped me escape my childhood. And at the same time, listening to audiobooks and to novels helped me escape the time when I was losing my vision and dealing with the paralysis and all of these NMO attacks. Like right before I decided to go back to school, I was listening to audiobooks, and that's what really helped me rediscover my love for literature. And I wanted to delve into that further. So I started off as a fiction concentration, and then decided to change to creative nonfiction and memoir, simply because I think I wrote another essay about what it was like to learn to read Braille, and I talked about losing my mom in that essay as well, and it was kind of like an interwoven thread. And then when I workshopped it in class, my instructor and all of my classmates said, "This is so rich, like the material is so rich, it shouldn't be just an essay, it should be an actual book length memoir." So that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to change my concentration to memoir and creative nonfiction. And then I went off to MasterChef in my last semester, and then won that and came back, and I was like, okay, I definitely need to write this memoir, which I've been working on since since I was in school. So it's been quite a while.
Well, I can imagine the memoir is constantly changing, right?
Yeah, that's also true.
Yeah, I mean, maybe not changing, but it's growing.
Yes, you're right.
You know, do you, when you look back, do you feel like your motivation in life has always been the same, the high achieving, the work ethic, or is it after sort of your diagnosis, your health issues?
That's a good question. I think I've always had the goal of being a high achiever. That's been in my personality since I was young. And I think it was instilled in me by my parents saying, you need to make straight A's, you need to be at the top of your class, you need to do this and do that to be the best. So, and part of that is, yes, it is in my personality. I don't know if I get it from my parents. Probably my mom is what my dad tells me. But I think it's always striving to be the best, but not necessarily thinking that I'm the best, because I think that leads it to arrogance. And I really don't think I'm an arrogant person. I feel like I'm always trying to learn, but I'm trying to learn so that I can be better. So one of the core values that we have at both of my restaurants, one of the company core values is be better today than you were yesterday. So for me, I think it's important to always be improving oneself in whatever aspect that one is trying to do, whether it's cooking, running a business, being a parent, being a wife, small skills like, I don't know, yoga or something. But I think all these are important as long as you're trying to work towards being better. So for me, I think being a high achiever has always been a lifelong goal of mine. And I think sometimes it's a double-edged sword, because yes, I'm a perfectionist, but I think in some ways that causes a lot of stress. So I'm definitely a type A personality where everything has to be just right, or I'm not happy about it. But I think some of that has led to why I am successful, or why I am perhaps, have some accomplishments under my belt. But I would say after I lost my vision, after dealing with all this, I think that's actually taught me to mellow out a little bit more
Oh,
and
wow.
balance the desire to be such a high achiever to understanding like my limitations and taking care of myself more, both physically and mentally. So I think that has actually taught me to pull back a little bit and live a more balanced life, and understanding that relationships and human connections at the end of the day are the ultimate goal to why we do everything we do.
That's a great answer. Yeah, because I would think that after your vision loss, you would go harder because you felt like, things are more limited, but no, it's
Mm.
actually pull
I
back
mean,
on
I
that.
felt like I had more to prove, yes, because I think not only is growing up as a Vietnamese woman, like a woman of color, like I feel like we already suffer from imposter syndrome, and we feel like we have to work harder to prove certain things. And then when I lost my vision, I was like, okay, well, now I have to deal with the disability. So I felt like in some ways I have to work 2 or 3 times as hard. So in certain ways, I guess you're right. In that way, I probably felt like I had to go, all out to really achieve what I'm trying, just a fraction of what I'm trying to achieve. But
Right.
in some ways, I think it has taught me, like, don't take life so seriously, because you just never know what's going to happen. And yeah, just don't take life so seriously. Learn to laugh at yourself and enjoy all of the small moments that happen each day.
So right after the win at MasterChef, I'm sure there's a series of thoughts, a series of ideas, of ideations to figure out your life. Like, what goes on in your mind after that? It's like I'm sure things are like the doors are busted open on anything. So what are you thinking after that?
Honestly, it was a whirlwind, and I remember having a lot of trouble. I think adapting to kind of the new role or whatever it was, because I'm, strangely enough, like, I'm an introvert and I like being anonymous and I don't like attention. So the hell I know why I went and auditioned for a show on television. I think part of it was because I couldn't see the camera, so I didn't really think in my head that I was on a camera or anything. But um,
That is so
I,
funny.
it was really weird, because suddenly I'm in the news, and I feel like my name and my story was a much bigger sensation than I thought it would be. And if you've lived like 30 years of your life just as this one person that's just living in Houston and doing their thing, and all of a sudden, like, your name is in headlines and you're on television and people recognize you at the grocery store buying like junk food, or like at Target buying underwear. And like, it was very strange to me. And it took me like 1 to 2 years to really figure out what this new space meant and how to live in it. And it was also strange because I didn't feel like I was allowed to voice what I was feeling, because I felt like it would come across as complaining. And what the heck, like, I won this season, and I won this competition. I have suddenly like a lot of cash, and there's no reason for me to complain. But it was, so I felt very isolated, honestly, to give you a very genuine answer. I felt isolated because I didn't know how to deal with this newfound like fame and public image, and how to I guess kind of reconcile that with my true personality. And everyone was coming at me and from all different directions, like, can you do this, can you do this, can you do this? And I was also the mindset of like, who knows how long this opportunity will last, so you need to strike while iron's hot. So I was saying yes to everything as well, and I was just very, very overwhelmed. So there were definitely a lot of opportunities, but I had trouble discerning what I should be doing and what I want to do. And it took me a couple of years to learn that. And now I've learned much better on when to say no or how to say no to things, because and now I kind of ask myself, before I say yes to anything, I ask myself, will this make me happy, and will it help me reach my goals or come closer to reaching my goals? And I only say yes if the answer to those questions are yes. So I mean, yeah, I don't know if that was the answer you're looking for, but it's a true and honest answer. It was a weird time to adjust after
Yeah.
that.
There's definitely so much insight in that answer, and I appreciate that. I mean, for you to even sit here to, spend time with me is, I get it. Every moment of our lives now, is so precious, and we think, as the older we get, it goes by so quick now.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. So once the dust settles and, a year or two into it, I mean, what's your process of figuring out what is the next steps? Or do you just kind of go with whatever the best opportunities are?
Yeah, it's a balance of things. So I still ask myself, those two questions, like, will I be happy doing this, and will it help me come closer to reaching my goals? And what does that mean? It means, like, sometimes it's negotiating better terms so that I don't feel stretched too thin, or, what makes a project worth taking on, or if I do something pro bono, like, is this for a cause that I believe in? And so it's not one like easy question, or like a science that I can just, or an equation I can just pump something through and then figure out, okay, yes, do this, or no, don't do that. It's kind of nebulous, and it takes different things, and just kind of how I feel that day too, like affects, like, am I too busy, is stretched too thin right now? Then yes, everything else has to kind of like be put on the back burner so I can just stay, sane, and still be happy and be able to sleep and at night. And so for me, I think it's still asking myself those two questions, and then thinking like, what's the next thing I want to do? Like, and I don't always think about this all the time, but it is important, I think, to think like, what's my 5-year plan? Like, where do I want to be in 5 years?
Right.
So that helps me think like, okay, do I open this new restaurant concept? Do I build out this restaurant? Do I accept, like, doing this TV appearance? Do I do this interview? Do I go to this event and network? I think it's really all of those things, but I've been thinking a lot about what I'd mentioned earlier about setting yourself up to be in a place of accepting opportunities from the universe. And it sounds a little hokey, but I talked to my husband about it, and he says he's been thinking about that a lot and saying yes to more things. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. Like, I should treat everything as an opportunity, whether it's to possibly collaborate down the road, or you just never know, like these connections that you can make with people that you don't think of in that time, but like a year or two down the road, you're like, oh yeah, I remember that time when I spoke to that person. That person might be great for this particular project or something. So for me, it's there's really no one right or wrong way to come across things and accept things or not. But that's kind of how I navigate this space now. So I have no idea. Like, I don't even know how I do it. I just kind of like go with my gut, really.
Yeah, I think that's the best solution to all of this. I want to get into going back to Vietnam for the first time.
The first time I went back to Vietnam, it was in 1997. I had just graduated high school, and as my high school graduation gift, my dad bought me a ticket to Vietnam to visit the country for the first time. This was the first time I flew alone internationally. I had no clue what to expect. Like, I had no idea like how to get through the airport. My dad just kind of like tossed me out there and was like, okay, here's your ticket, go to Vietnam. And I was staying with some friends over there. I had high school friends whose parents go back to Vietnam every year. They had business on over there. So I knew that I was going to fly over there, meet them up, stay with them. So I remember getting out of the plane in the airport back then, and it was very, very hot, and it wasn't, I flew into Ho Chi Minh City. So the airport back then, I mean, it's been remodeled since, but back then in 97, it still felt kind of like a really, like a warehouse. So there wasn't like, it didn't feel like a first world airport yet. And I remember when they asked me, when I was trying to go through customs and they were asking me where I was staying, I had no idea. I was just like with my friends and I gave their names. They were like, the address? I'm like, I don't know. They're supposed to be picking me up at the airport. I'm like this 18-year-old kid, like no idea where I'm staying. I'm sure it was suspicious. So I remember they put me in a little pen area, like they locked, like in this little area, a holding area, I guess. And I guess they were waiting for me to give them more information, but I was completely clueless and confused. And I just sat there. And I guess after a while they were like, yeah, she really has no idea what she's doing. They must have felt bad for me. So they let me go out. And thankfully I found my friends in the crowd of people outside to pick me up. But
Wow.
it was a very interesting experience, but I enjoyed the food. The food was very good. Very inexpensive. I loved trying all the new fruits that I never tried before, like mangosteen. Like that was the year I discovered mangosteen when it was in season. Just eating like every morning, eating like soy from the street vendors for breakfast, just going around shopping. But it was also sad because I think at the time there were still a lot of very underserved people. And so every time I went somewhere, like I guess people could tell I was American. And there would be children following me, like begging for money for like an hour. They would just be following me. And so, we would feel bad and we would buy the children shoes or whatever. But it was then, I think, that it opened my eyes that this is the country that my parents came from. And this is what, the aftermath of war did to the country.
Yeah, 97 was very early, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people, I think, were beginning to arrive more after 2000.
Mm,
Like mid 2005, 2010, I think there's like a fairly large, like now there's like a bigger push. People are getting more confident about
mhm,
coming back and it being very safe.
mhm. Yeah. I mean, now since then, I've been back plenty of times, and it's such an emerging country and economy. Like every time I go back, even if it's only been a year, I feel like so many things have changed. There's just buildings going up and so many opportunities over there. And I feel like it's I think if Vietnam, continues to and I don't really know much about politics or the economy or anything, but just from my own very small point of view, like I feel like if they continue to invest in education and in the world economy and in commerce, I think Vietnam will be doing very well for itself. Not that it's already not, but I think it will keep rising.
I started out doing this podcast sort of not really knowing a whole lot about Vietnam, and I used to go back before COVID 2 to 4 times a year. Yeah, I have a factory there, and with my family, and but as I'm beginning to uncover and learn a lot about, so for example, a few weeks ago or months ago, I sat with the president of Fulbright University, President Thuy. She told me that in 2005, the prime minister at the time went to Harvard to sit with Larry Summers, spent the day with him, the president of Harvard at the time. And he asked the question, what can we do to make our education system better? And Larry Summers said, you have to open up to academic freedom, which means you have to just open up so students are allowed to figure things out academically on a very open. So that happened in 2005. And then by 2013, they sent a delegation from Vietnam to the Ivy League system. So they went to MIT, Harvard, Yale. They went up and down and they did research to figure out how to open up the education system. That's just one sliver of the improvement that I feel like that's happening in Vietnam. And that's just only in the education field. But can you imagine like in the legal field, in the construction field, in the crypto, there's all of these different departments in Vietnam that is accelerating at like light speed. It's
Yes.
happening.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and we are feeling the changes. Like you said, it's like every year you go back, it's like a different country almost.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So being in 1997, your father, I'm gonna go back to that. That's like to have the confidence to like send your 18-year-old daughter back to a country where you ran away from. What was he thinking? What do you think he was thinking?
Well, I think my parents have always been very vocal and strong-headed about me knowing my culture. So, for example, growing up, I was only allowed to speak Vietnamese at home. English was for school, and outside, Vietnamese was for home. Mostly ate Vietnamese food at home. Learned the culture. So I think my dad, after my mom passed away, I think he was kind of in this soul searching. He was just, trying to figure out what his next step was. And he ended up going back to Vietnam after my mom passed away. And so this is when I moved to California and lived with my grandparents and some of my uncles and aunts and cousins. And then my dad went back to Vietnam for the first time. So this must have been around 95 that he went back for the first time since he left. And so I guess it's been about 20 years since he left. And he said the country's changing. He enjoyed his trips there. I think it was to kind of get away from Houston, where, the last year, the memory of my mom being sick and then losing her was for him. He just needed time and space to think. And so I think when he went back to Vietnam, he enjoyed it. So I think he wanted me to experience that as well a couple years later. So I am surprised though that he was just like, here's the ticket and I'll get on the plane and go over there. But I feel like that's kind of my dad's style. It's like always sink or swim. so, um, so yeah, I mean, I'm grateful for that trip. I feel like it was a good time for me to have the trip, and start learning more about where I came from and my roots, at that age. Uh, but yeah, I mean, since then, my dad, retired actually the same year that I was on MasterChef. So he retired in 2012, actually moved back to Vietnam, and has a house there in Ho Chi Minh City. And now he spends part of his time in Vietnam, but he also spends part of his time in Southern California. They live there as well in Orange County because all of his siblings are there. Um, so now my dad splits his time between California and Vietnam, but he hasn't been able to go back to Vietnam since the pandemic started and everything was kind of on lockdown.
Wow. That's amazing because it's rare when you hear about. I mean, I have a daughter, and I shudder thinking of sending her somewhere, especially a country that I left because 20 years before that there was a lot of hot water. So I get it now. Him being back before, and just
Yeah.
the warmth of that action to share with your daughter, like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. I want to buy a ticket for her to experience that. That's
Yeah.
an amazing story. So, your work in Vietnam now, what can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been back to Vietnam in a while, but there was a period, after I'd won MasterChef in the US, that I was going back quite a bit for different, projects. And one was, judging MasterChef Vietnam. They started the MasterChef franchise over there as well. So, of course, me being of Vietnamese heritage and winning it in the US, like I was kind of like the crown jewel that they were flying back there to do the guest judging and the
Right.
actual judging of season three in Vietnam. Um, then I was doing other things like in the food space and stuff. And for a time being too, I was playing around with the idea of opening a restaurant in Vietnam. But I I've never lived there long term, so I didn't really know exactly what uh, Vietnam needed in terms of a restaurant or what would succeed. So I wasn't comfortable at the time opening anything. I've lived in Houston most of my life, so I understand what Houston is like and what they're loyal to and what is missing here. And I understand the food scene here much better than I do in Ho Chi Minh City. So I kind of put a pause on that, but that's not to say that one day I don't want to open something there or do more business there.
Right. You know, we've talked about this earlier in a pre-interview, but this idea of gastro diplomacy. So the Thais have done it, Koreans, Japanese, the whether it's formal or planned out or very intentional by the governments. I feel like, especially with the Thai food or Thai restaurants, I know a little bit about sort of the government sending a little bit of help financially to Thai restaurant owners in the US. Is there sort of that understanding in the Vietnamese government with gastro diplomacy?
I feel like there's definitely some, and an instance I can think of is the Vietnam embassy in Qatar had invited me a few years ago to go to fly to Doha and do a culinary demonstration during this big culinary event that they have there annually, I believe. So, and that was my trip there was actually sponsored by the Vietnamese embassy in Qatar. So I think that they do have that mindset where they want to share um, the culture and the food through things like Lunar New Year and what it means to celebrate that, the foods of Vietnam, and sharing that with other countries around the world. So I feel like there is that definitely that sort of gastro diplomacy going on in the minds of Vietnam.
Yeah, I think with a little bit of push from the Vietnamese government, if they did it like the way the Thais did it, and I'm just putting it out there for the government, but if there was a little, I mean, because our food is very popular, I think, in the United States, and with a little bit of push, I think it could go a little bit further too.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that goes for like K-pop too, or
Hmm.
these other things that the Korean government really helps with the different industries that they're putting out in the world.
Yeah, Korea is doing a phenomenal job with exposing their culture to the world. I mean, now there's not like one American person or child I have met that doesn't know BTS or Blackpink or know the Korean dramas that are playing on Netflix. So for sure, like they, and Korea too used to be like they had a war, or before the Vietnam War, and their country was impoverished too. And I think they definitely had a comeback. So hopefully Vietnam is going to approach that renaissance soon as well.
It's mind blowing to think about 20 years ago, 25 years ago in the US about Asian Americans. I mean, with the advent of what the Koreans have done, it's really lifted. It's one of those things that lift high tides lift all the boats. And I feel
Mhm.
like they really just out and open up the doors for all of the Asian Americans to
Mhm.
go out and do their thing.
Yeah, I definitely think Asians are having a moment right now. Just, I mean, with being in the media a lot and just getting coverage, and not only because of the pop culture side, but there's this whole movement with all the backlash that we received during the pandemic and stuff. So I think now is really the time I think we can turn this narrative, and make it what we want it to be. So this is really the time to be doing that.
When I think about the journey that you've taken in your life, and the struggles that you've been through, are there things that make you afraid, keep you up at night?
I mean, I guess if anything, it would be just kind of the daily things of the day to day thoughts of running two restaurants and just the business and stuff. But um, no, I try. I feel like if I allowed myself to think too much about all the things that could be improved upon in this world, I think I would never be able to sleep. So I've learned to kind of compartmentalize some things and do what I can, and know that I'm just one human being in this world, and I'll do my part, and then try my best to support other people that are better at doing their roles to improve the world.
And what are some of the things that, beyond the food world, that you want to accomplish?
Well, I want to complete a documentary about my life story. I feel like uh, a lot of people over the years have told me my story is inspirational or interesting. It's helped them out. So I want to open up my life even more, and kind of allow people to really know the true me, through that lens. Because yes, people know me from MasterChef. It's kind of like I'm this two-dimensional person on TV. They know this one side of me, but I also want people to know that I'm very human, and I have my own struggles, and I have make my own mistakes as well, and that life wasn't always great, and I wasn't always optimistic. So I hope to uh, finish off a documentary about me one day, and have people be able to learn about all of me and to just see my vulnerable side in there. I want to continue expanding my restaurants and in the food and beverage space. Hopefully, I want to get some food products on grocery store shelves, and eventually, of course, finish my memoir, write another cookbook. Mm, that's it.
Those are a lot of things. I think there's a lot of people who would just be happy to have one of those things accomplished.
Well, Ken, you called me a high achiever, so I gotta live up to that title.
That's a lot. That's a lot of stuff to do. And it's always tricky for me because I'm kind of aware of, like, especially like the documentary and kind of working. You want to portray some things in the documentary, and so I walk a fine line of like researching everyone's lives, but then not giving away. I don't want to ask questions that will be revealed in the documentary, although I know nothing about it. But I can imagine that there's things that you want to preserve to tell a different type of story, like in a documentary.
I mean, I think that really comes down to the directors. vision for what that story is. Like, it's really up to the director for that story to tell. I think I'm just here to serve as the specimen for for people to observe. So I mean, I just want people to know where I came from, what it was like growing up as me, what my relationship with my heritage and my parents and my family are like, how I got into cooking, kind of all these backstories that people may not know unless they've talked to me or know me personally.
Yeah. Again, it's one of those things too where I didn't want to focus too much on your vision, the impairment, but I do want to ask though some questions about it. And you know, is it something that will be able to be fixed in the future with technology?
I think if stem cell research continues, and there's aggressive funding for it and research for it, I think it could happen. But basically, what would need to happen, from what I've heard from my medical team before, is that my optic nerve, I basically need to regrow a new optic nerve or get an optic nerve transplant. And I think the way towards that would be stem cells.
That is a possibility in our lifetime.
It's crazy to think, but I think maybe you're right. And I
Yeah.
always do. I'm like, how weird would it be if suddenly I got vision back? I would probably be staring at myself in the mirror and think like, oh, Christine, you look so different.
But then we would,
And I might be sad and then realize how mortal life is.
well, I think at that point we can regrow the wrinkles in our face, regrow smooth skin. But would you make that decision to, I mean, it's a dumb question, but I have to ask. So you would do it, right?
Right. I think, yeah, I mean, who knows? I think I would have never thought in my lifetime that we would have touchscreen phones and that was a norm, or like,
Right.
I don't know, just like all this automation that's happening in AI. Like, I would have never thought this thing. So, I mean, yeah, it could be in our lifetime. And I think if it seemed fairly safe, I'd be willing to try it.
Yeah. And then there was another question that I want to go back to the early part of the interview is when you were experiencing sort of this, you said you had a 4 day and you went into paralysis, but the vision wasn't deteriorating just yet, right?
So my first bout of the optic nerve inflammation actually happened before that. It was when I was in my third year in college. So I think I was 20 years old. So that happened in one of my eyes where the vision went blurry in one eye. And then I never fully recovered from that vision loss in that one eye. Some of it did come back, but I still had full vision in my other eye. So I was still able to drive and do everything and see the man, I was gonna call it the blackboard at school. That totally dates me, but I could see the board in front of the class in college. So
Kids
I
are
did
like, aren't they
experience.
white?
I don't even know. They called the chalkboard. They called it
Yeah, but the
but
blackboard.
it wasn't even chalk. You're right. It was probably, I don't even remember. College was so long ago. But I experienced the vision loss first in one eye, but it didn't really change my life that dramatically. And then a few years later, in 2002 is when I experienced the paralysis from the neck down. And at the same time, for several years after that, it was a lot of both. So it was the vision going in and out, and then my like dealing with a lot of motor skills and sensory skills, like kind of giving out to like those motor and sensory functions kind of giving out too. So I was dealing with on and off paralysis or numbness or tingliness alongside bouts of vision loss. So it was, both things were kind of happening a lot throughout my mid 20s.
Right. And I mean, just looking at you and the energy and the sort of the movement, just by sitting here talking to you, you seem so much at peace and the strength that you give off. I look at it and look at you and I realize that there's so much work that has happened in between, I'm sure, the diagnosis or the early years and today.
Yeah, for sure. And that those are things that I want to explore in the memoir and the documentary is how did I get from A to this point where I am today, how to connect those dots, because it was all over the place. It was obviously, like anyone's lives, not a straight line.
I really appreciate you sharing and being so open about all of these facts. Is there anything that I'm missing that you'd like to share with me?
No, not really. I mean, I just encourage like all of your listeners and viewers to follow me on social media. My handle is The Blind Cook, so people can keep up with what's happening next in my life through that. And have two restaurants in Houston, so hopefully people come and visit the Blind Goat in Xinjiao. So maybe one day we'll expand, but yeah, for now we're in Houston, so hope to have people and welcome them in our restaurants.
One last question. Why not have two blind goats? Why one blind goat, one Xinjiao? Like, what's the difference in the restaurant?
So the Blind Goat is my first one, and it's kind of, I call it like a contemporary Vietnamese gastropub. So it has the menu. My vision for that is more nhậu type food.
Oh, wow.
And we're actually in the process. We just announced last week that we're going to be opening the Blind Goat in a bigger space, and it's brick and mortar. Right now it's in a food hall in downtown Houston, but we're going to be opening it in a its own standalone restaurant. And so the kitchen will be bigger, so we'll be able to expand the menu and have more nhậu dishes on there. And then we'll have a full bar program as well. So so that's kind of what the Blind Goat is. Xinjiao is another venture I opened up with Chef Tony J. Nguyen. He's locally known in Houston for a lot of Viet Cajun food and modern Vietnamese food in Houston. So we partnered up together and did that. And that one is more like a modern Vietnamese restaurant where we're taking a lot of Texas ingredients and Texas techniques and infusing that into our Vietnamese food. So for example, we smoke our own beef ribs and duck with a wood smoker at Xinjiao. And then we put that in like kind of like an hủ tiếu ap chao dish, and then we do like a gỏi vịt, but we use like smoked duck that we smoke ourselves. So that's kind of like what we're doing at Xinjiao. So it's a little bit different, but both, I would say, a modern Vietnamese cuisine.
Legit. It's amazing. Amazing. I hope to get to Houston to try them both out.
Yeah, let me know when you come so we can feed you at both places.
I sure will. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your time today and your openness to come on and share so much about your life.
You're welcome, Ken. It was my pleasure. I'm glad to do this. I feel like, I do a lot of interviews, but this one kind of dived into a different set of questions. So I appreciate it. So happy to come on next time.
Thank you, Christine. Appreciate it
Thanks,
so
Ken.
much. Okay. All right. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to The Vietnamese with Kenneth Nguyen. The Vietnamese is produced by Brittany Tran and Javier Proenza. Special thanks to Jane Nguyen, Catherine Nguyen, Tina Pham, Sydney Jamie, and Crystal Trin. Please find us on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok at The Vietnamese Podcast. You can also find us on YouTube, where you can subscribe, like, and comment. Please rate and give us a review wherever you find our podcasts. Thanks again for listening.